The hum of the engines was a lullaby, a promise of escape soaring above the clouds. But the scream wasn't from turbulence, and the sudden jarring lurch of the aircraft had nothing to do with air pockets. It was the sound of a world shattering, a child's innocence violently shattered, and an entire cabin plunged into a silent, horrified shock. It was a single despicable act, committed at 30,000 feet, an act that would not only turn a plane around mid-flight, but would send a ripple of consequences across the country, reaching far beyond the tarmac and into the quiet corners of a life built on privilege and prejudice, forever changing its trajectory. Elijah Eli Hayes, a boy of 12 with a mop of close-cropped curls and eyes that held the quiet intelligence of a young artist, clutched a worn, leather-bound sketchbook in his lap. Seat 22A, a window seat on a Boeing 737, was his temporary home for the cross-country flight from New York's JFK to Los Angeles. This wasn't his first time flying solo. After his parents, Jessica and Marcus, had amicably decided to live on separate coasts 2 years ago, these trips had become a bi-annual ritual, a bridge between two loving homes. He found a strange comfort in the solitude, in the drone of the engines, and the boundless canvas of the sky outside his window. He was on his way to spend the summer with his mother, Jessica, a landscape architect, with a warm laugh and an endless supply of art supplies. His father, Marcus, a financial analyst who lived and breathed the rhythm of Manhattan, had seen him off at the gate with a hug that felt more like a promise. "Call me as soon as you land, champ," Marcus had said, his voice thick with a mixture of pride and paternal anxiety. "And don't lose that sketchbook. You're going to need it to impress Grandma Rose." Eli nodded, his gaze already fixed on the plains beyond the glass. The sketchbook was more than just paper. It was a chronicle of his world. Inside, the pages were filled with intricate graphite drawings of skyscrapers, fantastical creatures born from his imagination, and the faces of people he'd seen on his travels. He spent the last few minutes before boarding lost in a new drawing, a soaring eagle with wings that looked like fractured glass. He settled into his seat, placing his backpack carefully beneath the one in front of him. The cabin began to fill the low murmur of conversations, a kind of white noise. Flight attendant Olivia Chen, with a smile that reached her hazel eyes, paused by his row. "All set, sweetheart?" she asked, her tone gentle. Eli looked up, surprised by the kindness. He offered a shy smile and a nod. "Yes, thank you." She moved on, checking other passengers, her presence a calming, professional grace. The last passenger to board was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored cream linen suit, her face a mask of weary entitlement. Sarah Jenkins, the name on her first-class boarding pass. She had an air of perpetual dissatisfaction, a purse clutched in a white-knuckled grip, as if warding off a threat. She was a management consultant, flying to LA for a high-profile merger. Her business, Jenkins & Associates, was a boutique firm that handled acquisitions for small to mid-sized tech companies. She had a reputation for being ruthless, but effective. Her career was a monument to her own self-importance, built brick by brick, with an icy disregard for anyone she deemed beneath her. Sarah had been delayed at security, a minor inconvenience that had festered into a full-blown rage. She was already late, and the thought of being cooped up with 200 strangers was an affront. She huffed past Eli's row, her gaze sweeping over the economy cabin with a mixture of disgust and condescension. She made it a point to never travel with people like this, people who chewed gum loudly and brought crying babies on board. She found her seat in first class, a sanctuary of space and quiet. But the bitterness of the delay, lingered a sour taste in her mouth. The plane taxied out to the runway, the announcements from the cockpit a muffled directive. Captain David Sterling, a seasoned pilot with over 20 years of experience, a father of 2 daughters, ran through his pre-flight checks with practiced precision. He had a reputation for being cool under pressure, a man who believed that every life on his plane was his direct responsibility. He knew the sky better than he knew the streets of his own hometown. The thought of his own youngest daughter, Maya, flying to visit her cousins, often crossed his mind during these flights, a reminder of the precious cargo he carried. The plane ascended into the clear blue sky, the city shrinking into a geometric pattern of concrete and light. Eli watched, mesmerized, as the world transformed into a patchwork of fields and clouds. He pulled out a fresh page in his sketchbook and began to outline a new drawing, the skyline of New York melting into a swirling vortex of white vapor. He was lost in his art, the world outside his seat disappearing. The flight reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt signs went off. The cabin was a hive of quiet activity, passengers pulling out laptops, books, and snacks. Eli, deep in his artistic trance, had a moment of inattention. He shifted in his seat, his elbow bumping the open sketchbook on his tray table. The book, top-heavy and precariously balanced, slid off his tray and into the aisle with a soft thud. A couple of loose pages filled with his drawings fluttered out and settled near the aisle. It was a small, innocent mistake, the kind that happens 1,000 times on 1,000 flights. But on this flight, at this moment, it was an invitation for a darkness to emerge. A few minutes later, Sarah Jenkins, tired of the cramped luxury of her first-class seat and craving the sterile privacy of the lavatory, walked back through the galley. She moved with an air of purpose, her head held high, looking neither left nor right. Her path took her right down the economy aisle, the narrow space a claustrophobic gauntlet. Eli, still in his seat, was just reaching down to retrieve his book and scattered drawings. He saw the hem of her expensive pants as she approached. He ducked his head, a polite instinct to avoid getting in her way. Just as he reached for the last loose sheet of paper, a drawing of a magnificent falcon, his hand brushed against the toe of her designer shoe. It was barely a touch, a fleeting connection. But Sarah recoiled, as if she'd been struck by an electric current. "Watch where you're going, you little menace!" She snapped, her voice, a low, furious hiss that sliced through the quiet cabin. Eli froze his hand, still suspended over his drawing. He looked up, his large, innocent eyes meeting hers. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice a barely audible whisper. "I dropped my book." Sarah's face twisted with a mixture of rage and revulsion. The minor inconvenience of her delay, the discomfort of the flight, the quiet arrogance of her own superiority, all of it boiled over in that single terrible instant. She didn't see a child. She saw an object, a cause of her momentary discomfort. "You and your things," she muttered, her words laced with an unmistakable contempt. She stood over him, her shadow blotting out the light from the window. "Always getting in the way." The passengers in the surrounding rows, a mix of families and business travelers, looked up, their conversations dying out. They saw a woman, her face contorted with anger, standing over a small boy who was simply trying to pick up his belongings. It was a tableau of imbalance, of an adult's disproportionate fury aimed at an entirely vulnerable target. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" came the calm voice of flight attendant Olivia Chen, who had been serving drinks in the row behind. Sarah ignored her, her gaze locked on Eli. Her eyes filled with an ugly scorn flickered down to his drawing. She took a step closer, her movements deliberate and menacing. Eli felt a cold fear creep up his spine. He knew with a child's intuitive dread that something terrible was about to happen. And then it did. Sarah Jenkins pursed her lips, the contempt in her eyes hardening into a malicious intent. She leaned down just slightly, and with a swift, deliberate motion, she spat. The spittle, a viscous and foul globule, hit Eli squarely on the forehead. It slid down a grotesque trail of humiliation, a physical manifestation of her vile hatred, and landed in his left eyebrow. The cabin went silent. A gasp, sharp and collective, filled the air. It was a silence so profound that the low hum of the engine's kiswa seemed to vanish entirely. Eli didn't flinch. He didn't cry out. He just sat there, frozen, his eyes wide with shock, the warm, wet slime of her hatred a brand on his skin. A tear, hot and defiant, traced a parallel path down his cheek, but it was not from sorrow. It was from a searing, silent shame. He looked down at his lap, unable to meet the horrified gazes of the passengers around him. Flight attendant Olivia Chen was the first to react. Her calm, professional demeanor was instantly replaced by a fierce, protective fury. "What did you just do?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. She stepped between Sarah and Eli, her body language a clear barrier. Sarah, a moment after her own act, seemed to have a flicker of realization, not of remorse, but of the social gravity of what she had done. But the arrogance that had propelled her to the act was too deep to allow for retreat. "He was in my way," she said, her voice trembling slightly but her words defiant. "He needs to learn some manners." A man in the row across the aisle, Daniel Thompson, a freelance journalist flying back from a conference, had been half asleep. He had been woken by the raised voices and had seen the final, appalling act. His phone was already in his hand, and he started to record not the incident itself, but the immediate, furious aftermath. He captured Olivia's furious posture, the look of silent, burning shame on Eli's face, and Sarah Jenkins's defiant stance. "He's a child," Daniel said, his voice clear and resonant. "And you just spat on him." Other passengers began to speak up, a chorus of hushed, angry whispers. "Did you see that?" one woman said to her husband. "That's disgusting." A young couple in front of Eli looked back, their faces a mixture of sympathy and outrage. The atmosphere in the cabin moments ago, a quiet haven, had turned toxic and volatile. Olivia Chen moved with a speed born of years of crisis management. She reached for her communication handset. "Captain Sterling, this is Flight Attendant Chen. I need to speak with you immediately. We have a severe passenger incident in the main cabin. It's an assault on a minor." She kept her gaze fixed on Sarah, a silent promise of consequences. Sarah Jenkins, her entitlement now turning to a mix of fear and indignation, began to protest loudly. "This is outrageous. I was provoked. He was blocking the aisle. You can't just accuse me—" "Ma'am," Olivia interrupted, her voice steel. "You are to return to your seat and remain silent. Now." Sarah, for the first time, seemed to understand that the rules of her world, where her wealth and status insulated her from consequences, did not apply here at 30,000 feet. She hesitated then, with a huff of theatrical martyrdom, turned and marched back towards her seat in first class, muttering under her breath about how she would be speaking to the airline's CEO and having all of them fired. Her protestations, however, lacked their earlier venom. The collective condemnation of the passengers was a palpable weight, a judgment she could not ignore. Olivia knelt down by Eli's seat, her voice now a gentle balm. "Honey," she said softly, pulling a sterile wipe from her pocket. "Can I help you clean up?" Eli looked up, his eyes now welling with tears. He nodded silently and let her. The physical act of wiping away the filth was also a kind of cleansing, a small act of kindness in the face of a great cruelty. The shame was still there, but it was now diluted by the shared, silent outrage of a cabin full of strangers. The cockpit door remained closed. The cabin waited suspended in a tense silence for what would come next. Inside the cockpit, Captain David Sterling listened to the terse professional account from Olivia Chen. The words were simple, yet they landed like a punch to the gut. Assault on a minor. A passenger spat on a 12-year-old boy. His co-pilot, Mark Henderson, listened in on the feed, his face a mask of disbelief. Spit on him. My God, who does that? Sterling didn't answer. He was already running through the checklist in his mind. A passenger incident was one thing. A verbal confrontation, a physical altercation, a drunk passenger, he had handled them all. But this was different. This was an unprovoked act of extreme malice against a child. This was a moral failing, a human cruelty that transcended the normal bounds of in-flight disturbance. It wasn't about a spilled drink or a broken tray table. It was about a deliberate act of dehumanization. He thought of his own daughter Maya, who was just a year older than the boy. He pictured her on a flight alone, trusting in the system, trusting in the people around her. The rage that came from that image was white-hot and righteous. He pushed it down, forcing himself to remain calm, to think logically and professionally. "Confirm, Olivia," he said, his voice level. "The passenger is back in her seat." "Yes, Captain. In first class. The boy is unharmed, but he's a mess. Emotionally. There are multiple witnesses." "Understood." He leaned back in his seat, his hand on the yoke, the plane gliding smoothly through the stratosphere. The vast blue emptiness of the sky seemed to mock the small, vile act that had just transpired within the metal shell of his aircraft. He looked over at Mark. "We can't just continue on, Mark. Not with her on board. Not after that." Mark, a practical man by nature, raised a cautious point. "Captain, we're over the Midwest. We've got hours to go. We can land in Chicago or Denver, but it's a major delay. The airline will not be happy. They'll just want us to have her met by police in LA." Sterling shook his head. "This isn't just about a police report, Mark. This is about a child's safety and dignity. This is about what's right. If we continue on, we're tacitly approving what she did. We're telling that boy that this is acceptable, that he just has to endure it until we land." He paused, his voice dropping an octave. "I won't do that. As a pilot and as a father, I can't." He had made his decision. It was final. The weight of his authority, the lives under his command, the potential for professional backlash. None of it mattered as much as the simple, unshakable truth that a wrong had been committed, and he had the power to make a stand against it. He pushed the button on the overhead console. "Flight Attendant Chen, please return to the cockpit. I have an order for you." Olivia entered, her face grim. Sterling looked at her, his eyes conveying a silent understanding. He had seen the way she had protected the boy. He trusted her. "Olivia," he began, "I want you to prepare the cabin for landing. I'm turning the plane around. We're returning to JFK." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with a kind of grateful relief. "Thank you, Captain," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's the only option," Sterling replied. "Go back and make sure that boy is okay, and keep a close eye on the passenger in question. I don't want any more incidents." As Olivia left the cockpit, Sterling took a deep breath. He contacted air traffic control, his voice calm and professional as he requested an immediate diversion. "This is Flight 815 requesting a return to JFK. We have a severe security and passenger incident on board. The situation is not stable. We need to land as soon as possible." The ATC operator's voice was filled with a rare urgency. "Flight 815 understood. Immediate return to JFK confirmed. You are cleared for priority routing. Do you require any additional emergency services? We will require police presence at the gate upon arrival," Sterling said, "and I'd like to request a representative from the airline's security team." He hung up, the weight of the decision settling in his bones. It was a career-defining moment, one that could either be a testament to his character or a professional disaster. He hoped for the former. He then made the announcement to the passengers. His voice, usually calm and reassuring, had a serious, unyielding edge. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I regret to inform you that due to a serious in-flight security and safety incident, we have been forced to turn the aircraft around and are now returning to New York's JFK. Our estimated arrival time is approximately 90 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience, but the safety and well-being of all passengers is our primary concern. We ask for your patience as we make our way back to the airport. We will update you with more information as it becomes available." The announcement was met with a ripple of confusion and protest throughout the cabin. A few groans, a few sharp questions. But the silence that followed in Eli's section of the plane was one of understanding. They had witnessed the incident. They knew the security incident was a euphemism for the vile act they had just seen. The silent collective agreement was a powerful force. But in first class, Sarah Jenkins's outrage had reached a fever pitch. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood her hands clenched into fists. "This is preposterous," she shrieked. "You're turning the entire plane around because of some boy. I'm going to sue this airline. This is a gross misuse of authority." Olivia, who had just returned to the cabin, stood in the aisle blocking her path. "Ma'am, I am warning you one last time. Remain seated and buckled for landing. You are already in enough trouble." Sarah's protests fell on deaf ears. The plane began its slow, graceful descent, a testament to the captain's authority and a physical manifestation of his moral resolve. The arc of the flight was no longer a straight line from coast to coast. It had been bent, broken, and redirected by an act of human hatred, and the consequences were just beginning. The descent into New York was marked by a tense, heavy silence in the cabin. The initial protests from frustrated passengers had died down, replaced by a morbid curiosity and a palpable sense of anticipation. All eyes were on the first-class cabin, where Sarah Jenkins sat fuming, her face a thundercloud of righteous indignation. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her phone, which she'd been using to draft a furious email to the airline's corporate office, was already a moot point. Her fate was being sealed not by her own self-serving version of events, but by the quiet bravery of a journalist in economy. Daniel Thompson, the freelance reporter, had been diligently typing on his phone. He had a few minutes of video footage, not of the spitting itself, but of the immediate aftermath, the confrontation with Olivia Chen, the bewildered look on Eli's face, the collective shock of the surrounding passengers, and the captain's final resolute announcement. Daniel hadn't just filmed it. He had already started writing. He was a seasoned journalist, and he knew a story when he saw one. More than that, he knew a moral imperative when he saw it. This wasn't just a flight incident. It was a snapshot of a deeper societal sickness, and the pilot's decision was an act of profound and beautiful rebellion against it. He'd already sent a short text to his editor at a major online news outlet, the Daily Sentinel. His message brief but potent. Got a major story. Passenger assault on kid pilot turns plane around. Video. Get ready. He followed it up with a secure link to the raw video footage. He had a feeling this story was going to be massive. The plane touched down with a soft jolt. As soon as it came to a stop at the gate, the front doors were pushed open. 2 uniformed officers from the Port Authority Police Department stepped on board, followed by a representative from the airline's security team, a man in a crisp suit with an impassive face. Captain Sterling's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at the gate. We have been met by law enforcement. We ask that all passengers remain in their seats until instructed to deplane." The police officers made their way down the aisle, their gazes sweeping over the passengers. They were directed by the airline security representative, who had a copy of the flight manifest. He pointed towards the first-class cabin. The officers moved with a deliberate, intimidating slowness. They stopped at Sarah Jenkins's seat. "Ms. Sarah Jenkins?" one of the officers asked. "Yes, that's me," she said, her voice regaining its haughty, superior tone. "And I would like to file a complaint against this entire flight crew and airline. This is a disgrace." The officer did not react. "Ms. Jenkins, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." He began to recite the Miranda rights. Sarah's face, so confident, just a moment before, crumpled in a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Arrest for what? This is insane. You can't just arrest me. I'm a respected professional. I have rights. You'll be informed of the charges at the station, ma'am," the officer said, his voice flat. They took her arms, one on each side, and began to escort her from the plane. She was no longer the picture of elegant self-importance. She was a woman in a linen suit, being led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and shame. As they walked past the economy section, a few passengers, including Daniel Thompson, offered quiet words of thanks to the officers and even to the airline security man. When Sarah was led past Eli's row, she shot a look of pure, unadulterated hatred at the boy, who was now being comforted by Olivia. The boy flinched, but he did not look away. He saw the ugliness for what it was. Once she was off the plane, the remaining passengers were allowed to deplane. As Eli walked down the jet bridge, he was met by his father Marcus, who had been called by the airline. Marcus's face was a mixture of relief and a simmering fury. He saw the lingering distress on his son's face and the kindness in Olivia's eyes. He hugged Eli tightly. "I'm so glad you're okay, champ," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Captain Sterling, walking through the terminal, was stopped by a number of passengers. "Thank you, Captain," one man said, shaking his hand firmly. "That was a good call." A woman with a little girl in tow hugged him. "You did the right thing," she said, her eyes glistening. He deflected the praise, stating that he was just doing his job. But he knew it was more than that. He had made a choice, and the affirmation from the people he had protected was a powerful vibration. Meanwhile, Daniel Thompson's story had just dropped. The headline was simple and searing: "Pilot turns plane around after passenger spits on black boy." The article was short, but the video was the real bombshell. It went viral within minutes. The grainy footage of Sarah Jenkins's defiant stance and the pilot's unyielding announcement was shared thousands of times. On social media, her face was soon paired with the hashtag @SarahJenkins. A new, more specific hashtag began to trend: Justice for Ellie. The initial report from the Port Authority Police Department was brief, but it stated the charges misdemeanor assault and harassment. But in a world where a cell phone video could be a more powerful witness than a sworn statement, the court of public opinion was already in session. Sarah Jenkins was booked and released on bail. She had a lawyer, a sharp-suited professional who was used to cleaning up the messes of the wealthy. But this was a different kind of mess. This wasn't about a contract dispute or a zoning violation. This was about a video that had become a national moment, a symbol of a deep-seated prejudice and the profound act of courage that had stood against it. The story was no longer just about a flight. It was about a boy, a pilot, a racist act, and the public's instantaneous, furious reaction. And for Sarah Jenkins, the storm was just beginning. The karma she had earned at 30,000 feet was about to hit her with the full force of a global media firestorm. The aftermath of the flight was a relentless, all-consuming firestorm that engulfed Sarah Jenkins's life with the speed and ferocity of a wildfire. The viral video, a few moments of footage that had captured the raw ugliness of her behavior, was not just news, it was an event. It was dissected on cable news, debated on talk shows, and shared with furious commentary across every social media platform. The internet, with its limitless capacity for collective outrage, had turned her into a living meme of privileged racism, an avatar for every entitled person who had ever felt they were above the rules. The first blow came from her professional life. Her consulting firm, Jenkins & Associates, was a small but respected boutique firm. By the morning after the incident, the firm's website had been flooded with negative reviews. Her clients, fearing association with the toxic brand she had become, began to cut ties with her. A major tech startup she had been advising on a multi-million-dollar merger called her lawyer and informed him that they were terminating her contract, immediately forfeiting a massive fee. Her firm's phone number was no longer ringing with new business. It was ringing with angry anonymous callers who left hate-filled messages. Within a week, her business, the monument to her hard-won status and success, was in a state of terminal collapse. Her personal life fared no better. Her husband, Richard Jenkins, a partner at a reputable law firm, was a man of quiet privilege who had always turned a blind eye to his wife's sharp edges, seeing them as the necessary tools of a successful businesswoman. But this was different. The video was not a sharp edge. It was a dagger plunged into the heart of their social standing. He saw the shame in the eyes of his colleagues, the quiet questions at their country club, and the way their adult children, a son and daughter who worked in finance and tech, refused to answer their mother's calls. Richard confronted her in their pristine suburban living room, the television in the background, broadcasting a panel discussing the Jenkins incident. "Sarah," he said, his voice cold and distant, "you've made a terrible mistake, a public one. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about me. This is about us." Sarah, still reeling from the professional backlash, had no remorse for the act itself, only for the consequences. "It's just a boy, Richard. A moment of temper." Why is everyone making such a big deal about this? Because it wasn't just a moment of temper, Sarah, he shot back, his voice rising. It was hate. It was a vile, disgusting act, and the whole world saw it. The next day, he moved out. The divorce papers were filed a week later, citing irreconcilable differences and a desire to separate from a public scandal. Eli's family, meanwhile, had found themselves in a different kind of public eye. Eli's father, Marcus Hayes, initially wanted nothing more than to protect his son from the media circus. But Eli, with a quiet strength that belied his age, had a different idea. He agreed to an exclusive interview with Daniel Thompson, the journalist who had filmed the video. The article, which detailed Eli's love for art and his calm, thoughtful reaction to the incident, was a powerful counterpoint to Sarah Jenkins's public persona. I don't understand why someone would do that," Eli said in the interview, his voice small but clear. "It wasn't about me. It was about the color of my skin. And that's a sad thing." His words resonated deeply with the public, who had seen him not as a symbol but as a traumatized child. Donations poured into the family's GoFundMe, set up by a well-meaning stranger, with notes of support from around the world. The Hayes family redirected all the funds to a newly established foundation, the Eli Hayes Foundation for Kindness and Empathy, dedicated to teaching children about racial sensitivity and conflict resolution. Captain David Sterling, the pilot, was also in the spotlight. The airline, initially cautious, quickly realized the public relations goldmine they had on their hands. Instead of reprimanding him for a costly diversion, they held a press conference. The CEO stood beside Sterling, praising his moral courage and commitment to passenger safety and dignity. Sterling, a humble man, deflected the praise, saying he was just doing his job. He was given a commendation, a significant bonus, and a new title, Director of Flight Operations for Passenger Relations. He became a hero, a symbol of professional ethics and human decency. But for Sarah Jenkins, the unraveling was just beginning. The legal system, slow and deliberate, was now on her heels. The Port Authority police had handed the case to the district attorney's office. The charges were upgraded. This was not just a misdemeanor. The DA, pressured by public opinion and armed with the viral video, was now pursuing charges of assault in the 3rd degree, a felony, and more importantly, a hate crime. The spit, the prosecution argued, was not just an act of violence, but an act of racial hatred, an attack on Eli's dignity based on his race. The weight of her actions, once dismissed in her mind as a momentary lapse in a judgment, was now a legal and personal millstone around her neck. Her reputation, her business, her marriage, all of it was gone. She was a pariah, a living embodiment of the consequences of hate in a world that, for all its flaws, was finally starting to push back. The karma, so swift and brutal, was not a lightning bolt. It was a slow, agonizing process of seeing every aspect of her life, every pillar of her identity, crumble into dust. The worst was yet to come. The trial, the final and most public reckoning, was on the horizon. The trial of Sarah Jenkins, a week-long media spectacle, began with a packed courtroom and a jury of her peers. The prosecution, led by a sharp and impassioned assistant district attorney named Michael Rivera, laid out its case with devastating clarity. They didn't need to rely on complicated legal arguments. The facts were simple, and the evidence was emotionally potent. The first to testify was flight attendant Olivia Chen. She recounted the events with a steady voice, her hands clasped tightly on the witness stand. She described the boy Eli as quiet and polite, and Sarah Jenkins as an agitated and aggressive passenger. She delivered the most damning testimony, describing in stark detail the moment Sarah spat on Eli. "It wasn't an accident," Olivia said, her voice cracking slightly. "It was deliberate, vile. He just sat there. He was so small." Next came Daniel Thompson. He was the star witness. He played the viral video for the jury and the courtroom, and in the silence of the room, Sarah Jenkins's indignant voice echoed. The video showed her fury, her lack of remorse, and the silent collective shock of the passengers. Daniel spoke not just as a journalist, but as a witness to a moment of pure cruelty. He described how he had felt compelled to act, to record a truth that might otherwise have been dismissed. Finally, Eli Hayes himself took the stand. He was calm, dressed in a simple button-down shirt, a small but powerful presence in the massive courtroom. Under the gentle questioning of the prosecutor, he recounted the moments leading up to the incident. "I was just reaching for my drawing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And then she yelled at me. And then she spat." "How did that make you feel, Eli?" the prosecutor asked. Eli looked across the courtroom, his eyes meeting Sarah Jenkins's. She sat at the defense table, her face a pale, strained mask of a woman who had lost everything and was about to lose more. Her lawyer had advised her to show remorse, but she was incapable of it. Her expression was a mixture of fear and bitterness. "I felt small," Eli said, his voice gaining a quiet power. "And I felt like I didn't matter, like I wasn't even a person to her. And I felt really, really sad." He paused. "I felt sad for her, too. Because I don't know what kind of person you have to be to do something like that." That simple 12-year-old wisdom was the most damning piece of evidence of all. It was a moral indictment that no lawyer could refute. The prosecution rested their case. The defense's argument was weak and desperate. Sarah Jenkins's lawyer, a man named Alan Cross, tried to paint her as a stressed professional, a victim of an overzealous flight crew, and a public eager to pass judgment. He argued that the act of spitting was a simple, regrettable outburst, not a hate crime. He put Sarah on the stand. She spoke with a trembling voice, recounting her version of events. The delays, the rude boy who blocked the aisle, the disproportionate reaction of the crew. But her performance was unconvincing. Her words lacked sincerity, and her eyes held no remorse, only self-pity. Under cross-examination, Prosecutor Rivera eviscerated her with a single question. "Ms. Jenkins," Rivera began, his voice quiet, "you said you spat on Eli Hayes because he was in your way. You had a choice in that moment, correct? You could have asked him to move. You could have simply walked past. Why did you choose to spit on a child?" Sarah hesitated, her composure crumbling. I was just so angry," she stammered. "Angry enough to commit an act of physical violence and degradation against a child you didn't know," Rivera pressed. "A child who happens to be black." The word black hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah's face went white. She had no answer. Her silence was a louder admission of guilt than any confession. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts, including assault in the 3rd degree and felony hate crime. The sentencing was a week later. The courtroom was as full as it had been for the trial. Judge Margaret Sullivan, a woman known for her measured but firm sentencing, delivered her verdict with a sober grace. "Ms. Jenkins," the judge said, looking directly at her, "your actions on that flight were not just an inconvenience or a temporary loss of temper. They were a deliberate act of malice rooted in a deep-seated prejudice. You chose to dehumanize a child. You chose to believe that his dignity was worth less than your momentary annoyance. The crime you committed was not just against Mr. Hayes. It was against the principles of decency and humanity that we as a society hold dear." The judge sentenced Sarah Jenkins to 2 years in state prison, a surprisingly stiff sentence for a first-time offense of this nature, but one that reflected the severity of the hate crime. She also ordered that she pay restitution to Eli Hayes's family, and that she be required to attend mandatory anti-bias and sensitivity training upon her release. As the judge delivered the sentence, Sarah's composure finally broke. The fear and bitterness gave way to a quiet despair. She had lost her career, her marriage, her social standing, and now she was losing her freedom. The karma was complete. It wasn't just a fine or a public shaming. It was a total, comprehensive, and devastating collapse of her world, a consequence that went far beyond what she could have ever imagined on that plane. And so Sarah Jenkins was led away, her tailored suit, a stark contrast to the sterile, unforgiving reality of a prison cell. The plane had turned around, but the arc of her life had also been irrevocably altered. A simple act of hate had been met with a righteous response, and the retribution had been hard, fast, and complete. Years passed. The initial firestorm around the plane incident receded into the annals of viral news, but its echoes lingered. The lives of those involved were permanently altered, their trajectories bent by a single pivotal moment of human cruelty and moral courage. Eli Hayes grew into a confident young man. He still drew his art, now more mature, more complex. His sketchbook, a symbol of the trauma and triumph, was a prized possession, its pages a reminder of how quickly the world could turn. He graduated from high school with honors and was accepted into a prestigious art school. The Eli Hayes Foundation for Kindness and Empathy flourished its work, reaching thousands of children in underserved communities. Eli, now a young adult, served on the board, speaking at events and inspiring others with his story. He never held on to the hate he experienced. Instead, he had found a way to transform the pain into a purpose. Captain David Sterling, the pilot, continued his career, but with a renewed sense of pride and purpose. He often used his experience as a teaching moment for younger pilots, emphasizing that their responsibility extended beyond the controls of the aircraft. He was no longer just a pilot. He was a symbol of ethical leadership, a man who had chosen a costly and difficult path simply because it was the right one. His story was now part of the airline's training program, a case study in moral courage. Daniel Thompson, the journalist, found that his career had also been irrevocably changed. The viral story had given him a platform, and he used it to become a voice for social justice, pursuing stories of marginalized communities and the individuals who stood up for them. He and Eli remained in touch, their bond a testament to the unexpected connections forged in moments of crisis. As for Sarah Jenkins, her 2-year prison sentence came to an end. She was released a shell of the woman she had once been. Her husband, Richard, had remarried. Her children, now with lives of their own, had quietly asked her not to contact them. Her business was a distant, painful memory. The world she had once moved through with such self-assured arrogance was now alien to her. The sensitivity training had not truly reformed her, but the bitter reality of her circumstances had. The isolation, the loss, and the public shame had stripped away her defenses, leaving her with nothing but the quiet, agonizing knowledge that her own hatred had destroyed her life. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale of a woman who had, with a single contemptible act, brought about her own total undoing. Her story wasn't just a news flash, it was a permanent scar, a reminder of the consequences of hate and the unshakable power of decency. The plane had turned around that day, but it had done more than just land back where it started. It had become a turning point, a moral compass for a world that so desperately needed one. It was a testament to the idea that some wrongs are so profound, so heinous, that they can stop everything, even a flight soaring at 30,000 feet, and demand an immediate and devastating reckoning. 8 years had passed since the flight that had reshaped so many lives. Eli Hayes, now a 20-year-old art student in his senior year at a prestigious New York university, was having his first solo gallery show. Titled Ascension, the exhibition was a visual chronicle of his journey, a stunning collection of large-scale graphite and charcoal drawings that moved from fractured, chaotic urban landscapes to vast, serene skyscapes. The centerpiece, a breathtaking 10-foot mural, depicted a falcon soaring above the clouds, its wings a mosaic of shattered glass and brilliant light. The title of the piece was simple, 22A. The gallery was packed. Eli, looking tall and confident in a simple black sweater, stood with his parents Marcus and Jessica, who beamed with pride. Captain David Sterling, now a senior executive at the airline, was also in attendance, his face creased with age, but his eyes still holding that same quiet sense of purpose. He clapped a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Your dad sent me a photo of your drawings back then, Eli. I knew even then you had a gift. But this is more than that. This is a story. It's a testament to who you are." Eli's smile was genuine and warm. "Couldn't have told it without you, Captain," he said, and the two men shared a silent, profound understanding. A few blocks away, in a small rented room above a laundromat, a woman read a flyer she had found on a community bulletin board. The name Elijah Hayes was in bold lettering. Sarah Jenkins, her hair now flecked with grey, her face etched with the weariness of a life lived on. The fringes felt a jolt go through her. The name, the age, the city. It had to be him. She hadn't been to a public event in years. She had been released from prison, and the world outside was a place of endless, subtle judgment. She had found small, menial jobs and lived a life of total anonymity. She had become what she once disdained invisible. The memory of the flight, the trial, the public shaming it, was no longer a fire of outrage, but a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. Driven by an impulse, she didn't understand, a mix of morbid curiosity and a nascent, painful form of reckoning. She put on a plain coat and walked to the gallery. She entered unnoticed, a ghost among the vibrant, happy crowd. She saw him. He was not a small, frightened boy anymore. He was a man celebrated and admired. She watched him interact with his parents, with the captain, with the art critics who hung on his every word. He had not only survived her cruelty, he had transformed it into something beautiful. She moved slowly through the gallery, her eyes scanning his work. She saw the drawings of the city, of the people, of the fragmented world. She saw the piece titled 22A. She stood before it for a long time, her heart pounding. The drawing was not an angry depiction of a hateful act. It was a soaring, hopeful image. The sharp edges of the fractured glass in the falcon's wings were not wounds. They were prisms refracting light into a spectrum of colors. It was a visual representation of how he had taken a moment of ugliness and turned it into an engine of beauty. She finally understood. Her karma wasn't just losing her career or her family or her freedom. Her true, lasting punishment was seeing the boundless life he had built from the very pain she had inflicted. The shame was no longer about her public fall from grace. It was about the profound, unfixable emptiness of her own soul. He had ascended. She had fallen. And the distance between them, measured not in feet but in character, was a chasm that could never be crossed. She did not approach him. She did not seek forgiveness, because she knew she wasn't owed it. She simply looked, and in that moment, she saw not just the man she had hurt, but the man he had become. It was a quiet, private, and utterly final moment of a reckoning only she could feel. She turned and walked out into the cool night air, leaving the light and the laughter behind. The sky was clear and full of stars, and for the first time in a very long time, Sarah Jenkins looked up and truly saw it, and felt nothing but the crushing, unalterable weight of her own past. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a powerful testament to the idea that in a world that often seems to reward cruelty and disregard a single act of courage can change everything. It's a story about a pilot who chose decency over corporate convenience, a child who found quiet strength in the face of hatred, and a woman who was held accountable not just by the law, but by the relentless, unyielding force of public conscience. The karma in this story wasn't a fictional plot device. It was a real, tangible consequence that serves as a powerful reminder of how our actions, no matter how small or fleeting, have the power to create a ripple effect. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, please consider giving this video a like. Share it with someone you know who needs to hear a story of hope and justice. And for more real-life stories like this one, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next video.